Hey guys, today we'll be reviewing the X-T3 from a filmmaker's perspective. This is just one video in a series of videos I'm doing that provide a deep dive into the Fuji X-T3. The other videos in this deep dive series will focus on the X-T3 as a photographer's device rather than a videographer's. So subscribe and check out the link to the playlist above and below for those other videos in this series. Now, the X-T3 has garnered praise for being an all-purpose device for photography and videography with good reason. It can pretty much do it all. It's absolutely incredible for run and gun photography and videography. It fits with our style of photography and videography perfectly, and as a result, the last couple of years we've used this nearly daily for photography and slightly less often for videography. But in an effort to truly understand this camera and what it is capable of from a videographer's perspective, Denae and I decided to go out and make a film with it and try to use just some of the features that really make it great for video. The video we made was a mockumentary. The idea that I had for a while was an extreme office chair rider. You can watch the short film in its entirety by following the links again above and below. We had a lot of fun making this video, and honestly it's probably a lot more entertaining than this one, so be sure to check that out. But many of the features I'll be discussing, I'll be doing so in light of how they helped or hindered us to get the shots we needed for that video. And one of the biggest features that the X-T3 lacks that maybe could have been beneficial to us when we were trying to capture B-roll of Denae scooting around a skate park in particular was some in-body image stabilization. Of course, the X-T3 has no IBIS, making it perhaps one of the drawbacks of this camera for run and gun style videography. So since stabilization was critical though, I did mount the X-T3 on this really great and quite affordable gimbal. This is the Fuji 4500 gimbal. Since the X-T3 is such a small device, and since most of the lenses for the Fuji X system are also quite small, it makes it absolutely perfect for flying on a gimbal like this. And this gimbal is also small and light. I have an extra handle for extra grip, and I can still one-hand this fine with the camera on it for quite some time, and did often in that shoot. So this setup worked good for what we were needing. The lens I chose to use for the filming was the Fuji 16-80 f4, though I'm sure I will draw some criticism for that choice in the comments, maybe justifiably so. Usually you're not going to be using a zoom lens on a gimbal, as each time you zoom you throw off the weight of the gimbal, making those motors have to compensate more than they should. I balanced it on the gimbal at 35 millimeters. But there were times where I did zoom in a little bit or zoom out just a little bit, made those motors work a little harder than they should have if I was balancing it perfectly. But it handled it fine. There was really no issues. I don't think it was too much for the gimbal to handle. Of course, the 16-80 probably wasn't the best pick from an OIS standpoint either. This lens does have built-in optical image stabilization, but supposedly it's disabled internally when it detects that it's mounted on a tripod or when panning. In practice, I would learn from the footage later, it does do a lot of bouncing around and catching up, compensating for the panning movement where it wouldn't have needed to, and I found that it did cause me some issues. So not having that disabled was a problem, and on hindsight, maybe it wasn't the right pick. But if I were to do it again, I might just pick a wider prime and just utilize the crop in post when I needed to get in tighter. We were shooting in 4K and I knew the output would be in 1080p, so that would have actually worked out just fine. But the reason we were going to output in 1080p is because I knew I'd be shooting those intro shots, those slow motion shots of Denae in 120 frames per second in that high speed frame rate. And it is very cool that the X-T3 can provide that extreme slow motion right in camera, but when you are filming in that high speed frame rate, you are limited to only 1080p. But shooting everything else in 4K again allowed me that flexibility to crop where I found it helpful in post. And again, in hindsight, I wish I would have just shot the whole thing with maybe a 23mm prime and relied on that 2x crop when I wanted to get tighter. As far as focusing, there are of course several options here. The Fuji AK4500 does have a follow focus motor that you can purchase separately and utilize with this nice little wheel. And I played with that, and that can work well, But in my opinion, with the focus by wire lenses that the Fuji devices use, it doesn't work so well, even in linear focus mode on these lenses, which was a fairly recent update for Fuji. It can still slowly start to get off, and your focal range can be limited with that follow focus. So I'd say if you want to use the follow focus, stick with vintage lenses or cine lenses that were designed for that sort of use, and you'll have better results. But for us, we did utilize the autofocus, the continuous autofocus of the X-T3 in the lens, and we wanted to test that anyway. Unlike Sony and some other brands, there is no focus tracking, point focus tracking in Fuji yet, and only 2 focusing modes for video, spot focus or focus everything, all focus, and we did use both for different things in this video. Of course, using all focus in the B-roll wouldn't have worked because there were so many faces. We did use face tracking, but I needed to have point focus, which can be a little tricky with a gimbal, but it wasn't too bad. But if you compare to Sony, Canon, the autofocus tracking is not going to be quite as good on Fuji. But for the most part, it worked out great. The X-T3 does have a 2.16 million phase detection point spread across the full sensor, and as long as you provide the correct subject, it's going to get focus very well. Again, it's not as good as Sony or Canon, but certainly miles ahead of Panasonic or Olympus. I do have the Panasonic S1H. I'm filming this main video with it right now, and I just can't rely on the autofocus with that system, even though it's an incredible video run and gun video device. Otherwise, I still prefer the X-T3 if I need autofocus over that very expensive device. As far as filmic profile, I didn't utilize one in camera. I shot in F-Log. F-Log helps to ensure that you're afforded the most flexibility that you can get when it comes to grading and post. Though I tend to really like the look of classic chrome, especially in documentary style video. Whenever we're doing our vlogs out and about, I shoot usually just in classic chrome, but for this, it was nice to be able to shoot an F-Log, to not have to commit, where this was a little bit higher production value, I guess, than our vlogs. F-Log also helps with dynamic range, where it's very easy to be off by a little bit when you're chasing an office chair rider around a skate park and not wanting to miss anything. The one gotcha here, though, is that it can be really hard to gauge exposure in F-Log, which renders everything very flatly and low contrast in camera. Canon and other brands have the ability to show a video style while filming in a log profile, but Fuji lacks this ability unless you use a field monitor. But it does provide the zebra stripes, which is extremely helpful for nailing exposure, allowing you to ride the highlights rather than squinting at a histogram. And I do mean squinting because I didn't use a field monitor. Those can certainly be helpful and might be advisable if you want to do things the right way. But where I'm a one-man filming crew here and I didn't want to get this rig too unwieldy, I found that the LCD screen worked just fine, especially when you consider we were shooting in full sun. I had little problem or difficulty at all using the tilt screen on this device and being able to judge composition and exposure, but I would recommend using the large indicators to make it easier to see your settings, and also, like I said before, the zebra stripes. And speaking of bright sun, I did want to shoot the B-roll in 24 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/50 and an aperture of 5.6, and since you have to shoot at least ISO 640 if you're shooting an F-Log on this device, you absolutely have to have an ND filter to cut out all that light. I used the cheap variable ND filter from Amazon. I think this is a K&F filter. For the best quality, I'd recommend not using a variable ND like this is and sticking with a fixed ND. The only drawback there is that it's not as convenient to switch out when you need a different level of ND, which is why I didn't want to use them here. I didn't want to get caught missing a shot because I was busy screwing a filter or unscrewing a filter. So I just used the variable, and that was fine. I knew audio would be absolutely critical for both B-roll and for the interview, so I made sure I had 2 forms of audio being captured. I had Denae mic'd with a simple, cheap lav mic and an old but reliable Zoom H1, which I'm actually recording myself with right now. We had it tucked away nicely in her belt bag. A wireless sync option would be better for being able to monitor that sound and make sure everything was recording properly and the levels were good. But I've had those things fail as much or more than a simple Zoom H1 solution, so I just roll with these when I can. For backup audio, I did mount a simple Rode video shotgun mic to the gimbal, and I plugged that straight into the X-T3. You'll notice that the port cover here is removed, and that is a really nice feature of the X-T3, being able to simply remove that rather than have it interfere with cords and cages. And that actually did pick up really usable audio and was very helpful, especially one point when Denae took an extremely graceful fall. The audio cut out briefly on her lapel mic.
Oh gosh, oh gosh.
So being able to use the Rode shotgun mic instead at that point was nice. It always pays to have a backup.
I didn't know. Oh gosh, oh gosh.
And speaking of backup, when I did the interview portion, I did want to have 2 cameras rolling. For interviews like these, I really like having that handheld, raw sort of look. So I elected to handhold the X-T3 as an A-cam. And when hand-holding a device, I really like using the small rig L brackets because you can extend that left side out, providing a greater measure of lateral stability. It's also got a larger grip, and then I pull that against my body for those 3 points of contact, and that works great as long as you don't do any walking around. For backup, I don't have a second X-T3, so I used the, for all intents and purposes, identical image output from my Fuji X-Pro3 mounted to a tripod, which I did end up using for the intro shots because it had more of a dramatic angle that worked better for that scene. But that's it, guys. That's my short little case study into the X-T3 from a mockumentary filmmaker's perspective. Would I recommend the X-T3 for run and gun filmmaking? Unquestionably, absolutely, unreservedly, yes. I love this device. The color output, the functionality that it has. It really balances everything well, and the only things that I think could possibly make it better are coming out with the X-T4, but man, there's never been a better time to buy the X-T3, or there won't when that X-T4 comes out. For many of you watching this, it will have already came out. So I'd highly recommend jumping on the dropped prices of the X-T3 while you can. But that's it. I hope you found this video valuable, or at least entertaining in some way. As always, remember to do good with your camera, and we will talk to you again real soon.